Hello, my name is Grant Wright, Research Assistant for the Northern Alliance. This recording will be briefly examining local data for local improvement. This aims to provide you with a greater understanding of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation and how it relates to the local Index of Multiple Deprivation. We'll also look to explore how we can use that local version within the context of a local authority or individual setting. But to get us started, let's have a look at some key pieces of information regarding the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. SIMD examines areas known as data zones. There are over 6,000 data zones in Scotland, and these are geographical units which are typically linked to postcodes. The size of a data zone is associated with the population density of that area, and that's why data zones tend to be larger in rural areas than urban ones. There are 32 individual indicators within SIMD, and they come from a range of sources and reflect different aspects of deprivation. Examples include the likes of the proportion of people in an area that are income deprived, the percentage of premises without access to superfast broadband, and that is actually a new indicator from the 2020 version of SIMD. And there are education-based indicators, such as the proportion of people aged 16 to 19 who are not participating in education, employment or training, and this comes from Skills Development Scotland. These 32 indicators are grouped together into their appropriate domains, and these are income, employment, health, education, access to services, crime and housing. So for example, the access to services domain contains a number of different indicators, such as the average drive time to a school, the average drive time to a post office, and other related services. It also has a couple of indicators related to the average duration of these trips via public transport. Each of these domains within each data zone across Scotland are ranked from the most deprived to the least deprived. So, across Scotland's 6,976 data zones, 32 indicators are gathered and grouped into domains. These are all ranked together, and from that they can be split into quintiles or even deciles or vigentiles. Each domain has its own overall quintile and rank, but there is an overall rank and quintile which represents a summary of the domains, and this is what is commonly referred to in publications from the likes of Scottish Government or even within local authority reports. Now, this process involves all data zones in Scotland across all local authorities and communities. This means that SIMD captures relative deprivation and compares areas within one local authority with the other areas across Scotland. Hence, it is a national measure. In the context of the National Improvement Framework, there is an emphasis on closing the gap between National Quintile 1 and National Quintile 5. However, there can be little or no young people coming from areas recognised at National Quintile 1 or Quintile 5, for example, our island or remote rural communities. Nonetheless, LIMD aims to examine the local gap by using the same underlying data as SIMD, but instead of looking at one area in a local authority and comparing it to other areas in other parts of Scotland, it looks at areas within the same local authority. And this is a process that could be applied to any local authority, urban or rural. So for example, looking at Aberdeen City, we are using the same background data as SIMD, but instead of looking at all of Scotland's 6,000 data zones, we are looking at all of Aberdeen's 283 data zones. From that analysis, we can build local quintiles of multiple deprivation, which are specific to Aberdeen City. This approach can potentially provide a bit of a clearer picture in respect of local deprivation. And this approach is highlighted within a research paper using a rural local authority as an example. It notes that if we rely on the national measure to look at local deprivation, we may find out that we are missing out a level of detail. So, looking at a practical example from Shetland, where there is typically no areas identified as SIMD quintiles 1 or 5, we can see where this comes into play. So let's say you're working in this local authority and we have a community group offering additional services of support. You're willing to contribute to that using some PEF funding, and you have to determine where you want to prioritise that support. With the summary information presented to you, you may find it difficult to identify those areas who may benefit from additional support. But now, using that same methodology of producing a local index within the same background information, but focusing on the local data zones within Shetland, for which there are only 30, we can produce some local quintiles. And again, looking here, this could provide you with a bit more context information to direct some of that funding. Here we can see areas which are nationally identified as quintile 3 and is actually picked up as being locally one of the most deprived areas within this local authority. This process can be applied to a school also. So looking at this secondary school based within one of our island local authorities, we can see the usual distribution of the rule by SIMD. Again, a lot in quintile 4 and some in quintile 2 or 3, none in SIMD quintile 1 or 5. If we apply the local indices, we can see a range of young people coming from a range of areas identified as local index quintile 1 right through to quintile 5. We could go a step further here and assess the differences in outcome across these local quintiles and provide the setting with a little bit of insight on how they can target support to specific groups, and thus provide them with a measure of a gap. This process can also be reflected in a local authority context. So here is Moray Council and the proportion of no concerns within the 27 to 30 month developmental. Here we have two measures of the gap under the national and local index. And of course, this can be extended to other authorities where the gap isn't necessarily clear. And it can provide you with an overview of the gap in the likes of Orkney, where there isn't any areas identified with quintile 1. So, after that flying summary of SIMD and LIMD, here are a couple of key messages. SIMD and LIMD are close relatives. They share the same background data, and that background data is very important, so I'd encourage anyone to have a look at that. LIMD may provide the means for more effective local targeting, as well as provide you with a measure of the gap. And essentially it provides the answer to a question that most of us are interested in, and that what are the most deprived areas in my local authority area relative to the rest of the local authority that I'm part of. And finally, area level statistics can tell you about an area, but there will always be exceptions to that. Knowledge of the individual young person and family will complement any of these measures, and you can have socially deprived young people and families living in the least deprived areas also. Finally, I just want to thank you for your time. My details are there, so if you have any questions or queries, please do get in touch. We have a QR code there for you to scan using the camera on your phone and provide me with a bit of feedback on the presentation. If you would like to hear more about this and other items, I'll be discussing data with Alison Thompson on the 29th of September, so please feel free to join us there. Thank you very much for your time.